Hey everyone, it's me Sonia, and I'm back with another late night bad lighting video. So I did this video where I was telling you about how I've been having these dreams about my mother since she passed and how it's been a great comfort to me. And I don't like usually get annoyed when people leave comments, but some of those comments were annoying because people were telling me that seeing my past mother in my dreams was equivalent to communing with familiar spirits or demons or something like that. Now, listen, I'm going to just tell you what I think straight up. Don't be ridiculous. This is not the same thing as, using a medium or a Ouija board and actually contacting spirits. This happens in my dream. So you're going to blame me for what I dream about? I mean, when was the last time that you got to choose what you dreamt about? People dream about their dead loved ones. There's nothing wrong with it. Don't pull out the Bible on me. And as for talking to my mother, even though she's on the other side, people do that all the time. People do that when they go visit their loved ones at the grave and they say, "Well, I'm in grade 9 now and we got a dog." And people do that because we miss our loved ones. It's normal. Trust me, I stay far away from anything occult. The last thing I want to do is get involved with demons and familiar spirits. I mean, who wants that kind of trouble in their life? No, thank you. So I just want to touch on that because please spare me. I mean, maybe I'm just getting old, you know what I'm saying? Like I don't have the nerves anymore. People start pulling that stuff and I'm like, stop it, okay? So now let me tell you about all the supernatural stuff that happened surrounding my father's death. So back in 2009, my father, who was 87, started having a cough, and he had this like lingering cough through that summer, and he was asking me what I thought because he knew that I knew a lot about natural remedies and stuff. And I was just telling him, I don't know, you could try steam. Like we all just thought that he had some kind of a cold or something that wouldn't go away. And I think we'd all said to him, like, we'll go get it checked out. But in the meantime, uh, maybe breathing some steamy air. I mean, we didn't know, but we weren't too concerned. And he came back to Montreal because he was in Vermont. He came back to Montreal and he did go see his doctor, but the doctor didn't really tell him very much about what he found because there was a problem, but he didn't tell him. Well, even though the doctor didn't tell him anything, I suddenly just got this like I don't know, like some kind of inspiration. I don't even know what do you name this exactly? It was like a word of knowledge or something. It was like God just told me that he needed salt, basically. And I went to his house with a bag of, like at the time it was Himalayan pink salt, and I said, "Put some of this in your food and put a little bit in your water and drink it." I told him to consume salt. He didn't listen to me though, because he had been told for many years to avoid salt at all costs because he had high blood pressure. He was on blood pressure pills. And so he didn't take any of that salt. Well, a couple weeks later, he started getting swelling in his face and his hands, and this time he went to the hospital. And they did some tests when he came in, but they didn't tell him the result and they didn't tell us. They thought that he either had lung cancer or cancer in his brain and lungs, or he had a recurrence of TB because he had had TB when he was young. He had had TB during World War II while he was in Russia. And so they said that it could be kind of dormant for many decades. And then it could just kind of pop up again as a recurrence. Well, on the second day, I think, that he was in that hospital, he had a seizure because, in fact, what was wrong with him was his sodium, in other words, his salt, was so low that, it had gotten to a critical point where he could just literally die from it. He had a seizure, and when he had the seizure, they gave him sodium push, and they actually said they gave it so fast they almost gave him a heart attack. Turns out actually when he came in and they ran the regular test, they saw that his sodium was critically low, but they didn't tell him. and they didn't give him a saline IV. And also his doctor, a few weeks before that, had also run tests, and he also knew his sodium was low, but he didn't tell any of us. He didn't tell my father. So it turned out that actually my father did need salt. And because the sodium was so low, and he had the seizure, he ended up aspirating and having pneumonitis. When he had come into the hospital, they saw that he had, I think it was called a pleural edema or a pulmonary edema. I'm not sure which one, but it was like water around one of his lungs. And that's why they thought it was like lung cancer or TB. When he had the seizure, he got aspiration pneumonitis on the other side. So now both his lungs were compromised. Well, it turned out that the swelling that he had in his hands and his face and here in his chest, it was all because his sodium was too low, apparently. And it was giving him like a heart failure. So the weird thing is, how did I know that he needed salt? And it wasn't like I just thought it. I literally went over there with a bag of salt. So I definitely knew he needed salt. That was weird. When he was in the hospital and they kept saying he has cancer, and I told my brother he doesn't have cancer. And when they did the CT scan, they didn't find any cancer in his brain or anywhere. And so my brother said, well, how did you know that he doesn't have cancer? And I said, God told me. And he said, well, what else does God tell you? And I told him, you're going to have another child and it's going to be another girl. And I could see the two of them, and I could see that the older one was blonde and the next one had dark hair. And then that's actually what happened. He ended up having, the next one was another girl. So I was there with my father in the hospital for 2 weeks, and he did somewhat recover from, the emergency that he had with the seizure and the pneumonitis, but it just was too much of a toll on his body. And even though he came out of the ICU, after 2 weeks, he passed away. His body just couldn't take it, and it just kind of shut down. But when I left him that last day, he was still alive and he was still sort of with it. I went home, and his godson had been there that day as well. His godson and I had been there the whole time. So I went home that night, went to bed, and at 5 a.m, my phone rings, and it's his godson on the line. And I said, Robbie, what's up? Why did you call me? And he said, I didn't call you, you called me. So the weird thing was that at 5 a.m, our phones called each other. I was sleeping and my phone was across the room on the desk. And these weren't smartphones, these were the old flip phones. So how did this happen? We were just like, wow, that's weird. We hung up, went back to bed. Well, then in the morning, the hospital called and said that my father had gone into a coma, and it was at the same time as when our phones had called each other at 5 a.m. So that was weird. I did feel a bit like maybe my father had something to do with that. Well, we went over to the hospital, and I mean, long story short, he did pass away that morning. So I thought the phone incident was kind of supernatural, to be honest. It was just really uncanny. Well, after he passed away, my mother continued to talk to him often as if he was there. And there were a couple times where it seemed like there was something going on. One time she lost her keys. She was about to leave the house in Vermont to come to Montreal, and she was looking everywhere for the house keys, or I think it was the house keys. She couldn't lock up. She was looking everywhere, and she had really like ripped the house apart. Finally, she gets in the car and she's like, Ted, help me. And she like hears his voice in her head saying, reach behind you, Edith. And she reaches behind her in the car and pulls the keys out of in between the seat cushions. So that was weird. And another time she had this lawnmower tractor, and she was mowing her lawn, and she got up on some kind of a rock, and it was precarious. Like she couldn't go forward or backwards. The thing was about to tip over, and it was just kind of stuck, and she couldn't do anything about it. She got off it, and then she said, Ted, do something. And at that moment, my brother in Montreal gets this idea in his head out of absolutely nowhere. I've got to go down to Vermont. He gets in his car, doesn't call it, just gets in the car, drives all the way down, about an hour and a half, shows up at my mother's house in Vermont, just like that. And then he went and fixed the situation with the lawnmower tractor. So my mother, she had had many incidents like that, but those were like probably the two most memorable. So my mother was pretty convinced that my father was around and that he could somehow help her sometimes. Well, while she was still partly living in the house in Vermont, I had had that first dream where I saw him, and I I thought this is his spirit. This isn't just a dream. I was like awake in my dream. I see my father and he's just kind of in the house in Vermont. And I thought he's in that house. And then after she sold the house a few years later, I had another dream like that where I saw him in my dream, but this time he looked like he was kind of like, where is she? So, I mean, is that really his spirit in my dreams, or am I just dreaming about my dad? I don't really know. But there are other things that I would have to tell you other stories so that you'd understand why would I think that it was more than a dream. Because generally I don't pay much attention to my dreams. But I've had some that were very uncanny, and I guess I'll leave that for another time. But those were these strange, maybe supernatural events surrounding my father's passing. First of all, with me knowing that he needed salt, that I think was God was just telling me that. I was just the messenger, but he just wouldn't listen to me because I guess it was his time. But there was that opportunity, and then the phones calling each other, that was weird. And after that, he just kind of became like my mother's guardian angel for a bit. So put it all together, and it starts to be a bit odd. And my brother, who's a huge skeptic, he never believed much, but he was there witnessing that with my father and what I had said. And then when it happened again with my mother, and I said she was going to die in the summer of kidney infection, or kidney problem, not infection. Um, then he started to be like, "Huh, that's weird. Okay, this is the second time you've done this. Like, what's going on here?" So yeah, there is some kind of weird stuff that goes on, and like I said, for me, it's always like surrounding when people are going to pass, having a close call, or have just passed, or something like that. Anyway, let me know what you think and tell me if you've ever had any experiences like this. And thanks for all your comments. Thanks for being here. I appreciate it. And thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.